Look, I need to start this video with a story that's going to make you completely rethink how you protect your wealth. And look, I know you're probably watching this thinking, oh, that'll never happen to me. But that's exactly what Michael thought. Michael was 58 years old, owner of three successful businesses, with assets valued at approximately $4.7 million, and had been married to Amanda for 12 years. He thought he had a solid marriage. They traveled together, dined out 3 times a week. She seemed genuinely interested in his businesses. Until one day, Michael gave Amanda a smart necklace as a gift. You know, those devices that look like jewelry but have embedded technology. He thought it would be a cool, modern gift. What he didn't imagine was that this necklace would have an audio recording feature he didn't even know existed. And when he accidentally discovered this feature while browsing the necklace's app, he heard something that would completely destroy his life. Amanda was on the phone with someone, probably a lawyer, planning an involuntary psychiatric commitment. The strategy was simple and absolutely brutal. Get him declared incapable of managing his own assets, take control through an emergency guardianship, and essentially steal the wealth he had built over 35 years of work. My name is Sarah, and I spend way too much time thinking about asset protection and defensive financial planning. And look, if you're someone who has built any wealth in life, whether it's a business, investments, real estate, anything, but has never stopped to think about how someone close to you could legally take all of it from you, go ahead and click the subscribe button now and leave a like if this video helps you protect what's yours. Because here's the thing, we spend decades building wealth. We work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. We save 20, 30% of our salary. We invest in stocks, real estate funds, businesses. But we spend exactly 0 minutes thinking about how to protect it from people who are on our side of the bed every night. And before you think, oh, that's just paranoia, let me show you some numbers that will make you rethink that position. According to a 2023 study by the American Bar Association, approximately 1 in 8 marriages that end in divorce involve some form of attempt to hide assets or manipulate the property division through questionable legal mechanisms. That's 12.5% of all divorces. But here's the data that really shocked me. According to the National Center on Elder Abuse, in cases where significant wealth is involved, we're talking about more than $500,000, the likelihood of financial abuse by a spouse or family member increases to nearly 23%. That means almost 1 in 4 people with considerable wealth suffer some form of financial exploitation by someone close to them. And look, here's what most people don't realize. When we think about asset protection, we think about lawsuits, creditors, taxes. But statistically speaking, the biggest threat to your wealth isn't the government, isn't creditors, isn't a company suing you. It's the person who sleeps next to you. It's the child who has access to your bank account. It's the business partner who knows all your passwords. Let me show you how this works in practice with real numbers. Imagine you have a net worth of $2 million. You're not a billionaire, but it's considerable money. You worked 30 years to get here. Of those $2 million, $800,000 is in liquid investments, stocks, funds, $600,000 is equity in your house, $400,000 is the value of your business, $200,000 in other assets. Now your marriage falls apart. You discover your spouse was planning something similar to what Amanda was doing to Michael. In a standard divorce in the United States, with a community property regime, you would automatically lose 50% of everything that was built during the marriage. Let's say 70% of your wealth was built during the marriage. That's $1.4 million. Half of that, $700,000 you lose immediately. But here's where it gets really interesting. If your spouse manages to paint you as someone unstable, if they get medical documentation suggesting you're not fit to manage your assets, if they get a judge to agree to a temporary guardianship, you don't just lose 50%, you can lose control of 100% of your assets while the process plays out. And you know how long a guardianship process can last? According to data from the National Guardianship Association, the average is 18 to 36 months. 3 years where someone else, potentially someone who wants to destroy you, has total control over your money. Going back to Michael's story, when he heard that recording, he didn't panic. And look, this is important. Most people, when they discover something like this, immediately go into confrontation mode. They go there, throw it in their face, and that's when things really hit the fan. Michael did it differently. He had built 3 businesses from scratch. He knew how to negotiate, how to plan, how to play the long game. So he did something very smart. He started documenting absolutely everything. He saved all the recordings from the necklace. He started filming his daily interactions, not obviously, but he had security cameras in the house that captured conversations. He scheduled appointments with 3 different psychologists and had complete mental health evaluations, all showing he was perfectly sane. And here's the genius move. He started moving his assets in a way that was completely legal, but that protected his wealth. He didn't hide anything that would be illegal, but he restructured everything. Here's the thing. There are completely legal ways to protect your assets that most people simply don't know about. And look, I'm not talking about offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands or shady schemes. I'm talking about legal tools that wealthy people have been using for decades, but that nobody explains to the middle class. Here's what Michael did. First, he consulted 3 lawyers specializing in estate planning. Not 1, 3, because he wanted to understand all the options and see where there was consensus. Here's what he discovered and implemented. 1. Irrevocable trust. Michael placed 60% of his liquid investments, that's approximately $480,000, in an irrevocable trust. Now, you might be thinking, what the hell is an irrevocable trust? It's basically a separate legal entity. You transfer assets to the trust, but you're no longer the technical owner of those assets. The trust is the owner. You can be a beneficiary of the trust, you can receive income from the trust, but you don't directly control those assets. Why does this matter? Because if you're not technically the owner, those assets aren't part of your divisible estate in a divorce. They can't be touched in a guardianship proceeding. According to a 2024 study by the Wealth Management Association, irrevocable trusts reduced asset losses in divorces by an average of 34%. But here's the important detail. You need to do this before there's any indication of a problem. If you create a trust 2 days after your wife files for divorce, any minimally competent judge will see this as an attempt to hide assets, and you're going to get screwed. Michael had the advantage of having discovered her plans months before any legal action. 2. Business equity transfer. Michael had 100% ownership in his 3 companies. He did something smart. He transferred 49% of the shares to a family trust, where his children from a previous marriage were the primary beneficiaries. He capped 51%, so he still had operational control, but drastically reduced the value of his personal estate. Here's the math. If the companies were worth $400,000 total, he had just removed $196,000 from his divisible estate. And since the transfer was to a trust benefiting his children, it had a legitimate estate planning justification. 3. Life insurance with strategic ownership. This is a move that few people know about. Michael had a $1 million life insurance policy, but he changed the ownership of that policy to an ILIT, Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust. What does this mean? The cash surrender value of the policy and the death benefit are no longer part of his estate. They belong to the trust. If he died, Amanda wouldn't see a cent of that $1 million. It would go directly to the beneficiaries designated in the trust, which were his children. Now, here's what most people don't realize about asset protection. It's not just about the math and legal structures. It's about psychology. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called availability heuristic, basically our tendency to assess risks based on how easily we can remember examples. If you've never seen anyone close to you lose everything in a divorce, you radically underestimate that risk. If you've never known anyone who was a victim of financial abuse by a family member, you think it never happens. But the data tells a different story. According to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. 99%. And financial abuse isn't just controlling your partner's money, it's also planning to appropriate their assets. There's also what psychologists call normalcy bias. our tendency to believe that things will continue working as they always have. My marriage is fine. I don't need to worry about this. My business partner has been my best friend for 20 years. He would never betray me. But here's the brutal reality. According to data from the National Bureau of Economic Research, 42% of marriages in the United States end in a divorce, and in marriages where at least one spouse earns more than $200,000 per year, that number rises to 47%. The more money is at stake, the more unstable the relationship becomes. Now, you might be thinking, Sarah, this all seems very cynical. Are you suggesting I should suspect the person I love? And look, I completely understand that objection. Nobody wants to live in a constant state of paranoia. Nobody wants to structure their financial life as if they were constantly prepared for the worst possible betrayal. But here's an analogy I want you to consider. Do you have car insurance? Of course you do. You have it because it's legal to have, but also because it's prudent. Now, when you buy car insurance, are you suspecting you're going to crash your car? No. Are you planning to crash? Obviously not. But you recognize that accidents happen, and when they do, you want to be protected. Asset protection is the same thing. It's not about suspecting your spouse. It's about recognizing that people change, circumstances change. And when there's a lot of money at stake, even the most upright people can behave in surprising ways. Here's another piece of data. According to a study by the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, 68% of divorce attorneys reported an increase in cases where one spouse tried to hide assets or manipulate the legal process to maximize their gain. 68%, and this was measured compared to just 5 years ago. Going back to Michael's story, after 3 months of documenting everything and quietly restructuring his assets, he finally confronted Amanda. But he didn't confront her emotionally. He did something much smarter. He scheduled a meeting with Amanda with his lawyer present. He presented the recordings from the necklace, all perfectly legal because in many U.S. states, only one party needs to consent to recording conversations they're participating in. He presented all his mental health documentation showing he was perfectly sane. He presented financial records showing that everything he had done was legal and appropriate. And then he made an offer. Amicable divorce, she takes 30% of the assets, less than the 50% she would be entitled to, but everything happens quickly and without public scandal. The alternative? He sues for attempted fraud, exposes everything publicly, and she probably walks away with nothing but enormous legal costs. Amanda accepted the 30%. That was still approximately $420,000, not a small amount of money, but Michael maintained control over his businesses, his main investments, and his sanity. But here's what really matters from this story. Michael was only able to do this because he had prepared. He had created protection structures. He had documented everything. And look, if he hadn't discovered her plans when he did, if he hadn't acted strategically, he could have lost absolutely everything. Here's the thing. You don't need to be in a dramatic situation like Michael's to start protecting your assets. In fact, the best time to protect your assets is when you don't need to, when there's no crisis, when there's no imminent divorce, when there's no conflict. Because here's the reality. If you wait until you need it, it's already too late. So let me give you practical and specific steps you can start implementing today. And look, some of these steps you can do yourself. Others will require professionals, but all of them are essential. Step 1. Complete asset audit. Before protecting anything, you need to know exactly what you have. And I'm not talking about a vague estimate. I'm talking about a detailed spreadsheet with every bank where you have an account and the exact balance. Every investment, stocks, funds, cryptocurrencies, everything. Real estate with current market value. Not what you think it's worth, what it's actually worth. Business ownership with realistic valuation. Vehicles, jewelry, art, any asset of value. Retirement accounts and pensions. Life insurance with cash surrender value. According to the Financial Planning Association, only 23% of Americans know exactly how much wealth they have with a margin of error less than 10%. That's ridiculous. You can't protect what you don't know. time needed? An entire weekend of focused work. Is it boring? Yes. Is it necessary? Absolutely. Step 2. Vulnerability analysis. After knowing what you have, you need to identify what's vulnerable. Here's a simple framework. For each asset, ask, is this asset in my individual name or is there some protection structure? In a divorce, would this asset be considered marital property? Could a creditor seize this asset? If I became incapacitated, who would have control over this asset? If the answers are individual name, yes, yes, and I don't know, congratulations, you've just identified critical vulnerabilities. Statistically speaking, according to the American College of Trust and Estate Council, people with assets above $500,000 have on average 62% of their assets in high vulnerability categories. That means more than half of what you have could be lost in a legal dispute. Step 3. Implementation of basic protection structures. Here are the tools you can start implementing immediately. A. Prenuptial or postnuptial. If you're married and don't have a prenup, you're flying without a safety net. And look, I know this is a delicate subject. Nobody wants to talk about prenups because it seems like you're planning for the marriage to fail. But here's an interesting statistic. According to a study by the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, couples who have prenuptial agreements have an 11% lower divorce rate than couples without prenups. Why? Because the process of creating a prenup forces difficult conversations about money, expectations, and values, and those conversations strengthen the relationship. If you're already married and don't have a prenup, you can create a postnup. It works the same way, just after the marriage. It's harder to do because now you need to convince your spouse to sign, but it's still possible. Cost? Between $2,500 and $10,000, depending on complexity. Is it expensive? Yes. Is it cheaper than losing 50% of your assets? Absolutely. B. Maximizing protected accounts. Remember I mentioned retirement accounts having legal protection? Here's what you should do. Contribute the maximum allowed to your 401k. In 2025, that's $23,500 or $31,000 if you're 50 plus. Open and maximize an IRA, $7,000 if you're 50 plus. If you have your own business, set up a solo 401k or SEP IRA that allows much larger contributions. Just by doing this, you're moving $30,000 to $60,000 per year to protected assets. In 10 years, that's $300,000 to $600,000 that are legally protected. C. Strategic asset titling. Depending on your state, you can use something called tenancy by the entirety for properties. This means you and your spouse own the property as a single unit, not as two individuals. The property can only be seized if you both owe the money. If only you owe it, the property is protected. Not all states allow this, but where it does, it's a powerful protection tool. Now, if you have more significant wealth, we're talking about more than $1 million, you need more sophisticated structures. And look, this is where you absolutely need professionals. Don't try to do this yourself because you're going to make mistakes and end up creating more problems than solutions. 1. Family Limited Partnership, FLP. An FLP is a structure where you create a family partnership and transfer assets to that partnership. You maintain control as the general partner, but the technical ownership belongs to the partnership. Why is this powerful? For 3 reasons. First, it creates a layer of separation between you and the assets. Creditors and lawsuits have much more difficulty reaching the partnership's assets. Second, it allows for more efficient tax planning. You can transfer partnership interests to family members with legitimate valuation discounts, sometimes up to 30–40% discount. Third, it maintains control. As general partner, you make all operational decisions, even if you only own 1% of the partnership. Implementation cost? Between $5,000 and $15,000. Annual maintenance, $2,000 to $5,000 in accounting and legal compliance. Is it worth it? According to the Journal of Financial Planning, FLPs reduced asset exposure in lawsuits by an average of 41%. 2. Domestic Asset Protection Trust, DAPT. This is an extremely powerful tool that only 19 American states allow. A DAPT is a trust where you can be the beneficiary of your own assets, but the assets are protected from creditors and lawsuits. In states that allow it, Alaska, Delaware, Nevada, South Dakota, and others, you create a trust, transfer assets to it, and after a seasoning period, usually 2 to 4 years, those assets become essentially untouchable. Here's an impressive fact. According to the Nevada Banking Division, assets in DAPTs have never been successfully penetrated in a legal dispute when the trust was properly structured and the seasoning period was respected. Never. But there's a critical detail. You need to do this when there's no known creditor or imminent lawsuit. If you do it after being sued, it's considered a fraudulent transfer, and it doesn't work. Cost? $8,000 to $25,000 for setup, plus $3,000 to $8,000 per year in trustee fees and maintenance. 3. Offshore Asset Protection Trust. Look, I know that when I say offshore, everyone thinks of illegal schemes and tax evasion, but offshore asset protection trusts, when done correctly and with full disclosure to the IRS, are completely legal. The advantage of jurisdictions like Cook Islands, Nevis, or Belize is that they don't recognize American court judgments. So even if someone wins a lawsuit against you in the US, the offshore trust doesn't have to pay. Of course, you still need to declare everything to the IRS and pay all taxes owed, but the protection against lawsuits is almost absolute. A lawyer I interviewed told me about a client who had $3 million in an offshore trust. The client lost an $8 million lawsuit. The creditor tried for 7 years to access the trust, never succeeded, eventually gave up and accepted a settlement of $200,000, less than 3% of the value he was theoretically entitled to. Cost? $15,000 to $25,000 initial, plus $5,000 to $15,000 per year in trustee fees and maintenance. Now, you might be thinking, Sarah, this is all very expensive. I don't have $50,000 to spend on protection structures. And look, I understand, but here's how you need to think about it. Asset protection is not a cost, it's insurance. And like any insurance, you need to calculate the cost versus the benefit. Let's do the math together. Let's say you have a net worth of $2 million. You spend $20,000 on robust protection structures. That's 1% of your assets. Now, let's say these structures prevent a loss of just 20% of your assets in an eventual divorce or lawsuit. 20% of $2 million is $400,000. You spent $20,000 to potentially protect $400,000. That's a 20x return if the protection is triggered. And even if you consider a 30% probability of needing the protection, remember the divorce numbers, the expected value is still $120,000 in protection for an investment of $20,000. The math couldn't be clearer. This is where it gets really interesting because I see people making the same mistakes over and over, and these mistakes not only fail to protect assets, they actively create more problems. Mistake number 1, acting too late. 80% of asset protection attempts I see fail because the person waited until they were already in crisis. You can't create a trust 2 days before filing for divorce. You can't transfer assets after being sued. This is called fraudulent transfer, and judges hate it. According to the Uniform Fraudulent Transfer Act, any transfer made with the purpose of hindering, delaying, or defrauding creditors can be reversed, and courts have a look-back period of up to 4 years to examine suspicious transfers. The golden rule: protection structures need to be in place at least 2 to 3 years before any dispute. Ideally, they're created when everything is fine, as part of normal financial planning. Mistake number 2, doing it yourself. I see this constantly. Someone reads a few articles on the internet, thinks they understand trusts and LLCs, and tries to structure everything themselves using a $500 online service. Here's the problem. Asset protection has extremely specific legal nuances. A mistake in the trust language, a failure to follow corporate formalities, a skipped step in the trust funding process. Any of these errors can completely invalidate the protection. According to the American Bar Association, 73% of trusts created without adequate legal supervision have defects that render them ineffective for asset protection. 73%. It's like trying to perform surgery on yourself because you watched YouTube videos. Technically possible? Maybe. Good idea? Definitely not. Mistake number 3. Unnecessary complexity. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there are people who create absurdly complex structures without necessity. 4 different trusts, 3 LLCs, 2 partnerships, all interconnected in ways that even the lawyer themselves can't clearly explain. Complexity is not the goal, protection is the goal, and frequently protection comes from relatively simple structures implemented correctly. I knew a guy who had $1.2 million in assets, but had created a structure with 7 different entities. He was spending $15,000 per year just on accounting and compliance to protect $1.2 million. The math didn't make sense. The rule I use, your protection structure should cost at most 2 to 3% of the protected assets in annual costs. If you're spending more than that, you're probably over-engineering. Now, here's something nobody talks about regarding asset protection, but that is absolutely critical: the psychological impact. Creating asset protection structures fundamentally changes how you think about your relationships, and this can be both positive and negative. On the positive side, when you know your assets are protected, you can make relationship decisions based on love and real compatibility, not financial fear. You don't stay trapped in a bad marriage because you're afraid of losing half of what you built. But on the negative side, some people become paranoid. They start seeing threats where none exist. They start questioning every move their partner makes through a lens of, are they trying to rob me? There's a delicate balance here, and the key is understanding the difference between prudent protection and destructive paranoia. Let me give you a framework for deciding what level of asset protection makes sense for you. Level 1, basic protection, assets up to $500,000. If you're in this range, you probably don't need complex structures. Your focus should be prenup or post-nup if married, maximizing protected retirement accounts, adequate life insurance, updated will and healthcare directive. Total cost $3,000 to $8,000 initial, minimal annual maintenance. Level 2, intermediate protection, assets from $500,000 to $2 million. Here, you start having enough assets where more robust structures are worthwhile. Everything from Level 1, revocable living trust to avoid probate, LLC for investment properties, umbrella insurance policy, consideration of a DAPT depending on the state. Total cost $10,000 to $25,000 initial, $3,000 to $7,000 annually. Level 3, advanced protection, assets above $2 million. Here, sophisticated structures start to make mathematical sense. Everything from levels 1 and 2, family limited partnership or family management LLC, irrevocable life insurance trust, DAPT or consideration of offshore trust, integrated tax planning strategies. Total cost $25,000 to $75,000 initial, $10,000 to $30,000 annually. The key is not to spend more on protection than the value of the protection justifies, but also not to cut corners where you shouldn't. Warning signs you can't ignore. Look, I don't want to make anyone paranoid, but there are certain warning signs you absolutely cannot ignore if you have significant assets. Sign number 1, sudden interest in your finances. If your spouse or partner who never cared about finances suddenly wants to know everything, how much you earn, where it's invested, account passwords, this could be normal. After all, it's good when couples manage finances together. but it could also be planning for something. What makes it suspicious is the interest appears out of nowhere, without an obvious triggering event, like buying a house together or planning for retirement. Sign number 2, suggestions to change legal structures. Honey, why don't we put everything in joint names to simplify? Why don't you add me as a co-signer on the company accounts? Let's update your will to leave everything to me. These suggestions may be completely innocent, but they can also be the beginning of a plan to consolidate control over your assets. Sign number 3, documentation and evidence disappearing. Important documents going missing, account histories being deleted, important financial conversations that have no written follow-up. According to financial fraud experts, controlling information is always the first step in asset appropriation schemes. Sign number 4, pressure for quick financial decisions. We need to sign this today. This opportunity expires tomorrow. Trust me, you don't need to read everything. Legitimate financial decisions can be made thoughtfully. Pressure to decide quickly is almost always a red flag. If you're seeing these signs, here's what you should not do. Don't confront immediately. Don't transfer everything to your name alone, which may be illegal. Don't tell the person you're consulting lawyers. Don't change passwords and access in an obvious way. What you should do: 1. Document everything quietly. Make copies of all financial documents. Take screenshots of accounts. Keep a detailed diary of relevant conversations and events. Store everything somewhere the other person doesn't have access. Separate email, private cloud storage, or even physically at someone you trust. 2. Consult professionals discreetly. Schedule consultations with a family law attorney and a financial planner specializing in asset protection. Use your personal email, not shared. Pay with an account only you can see. According to the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, 91% of divorce cases where one party quietly prepared in advance resulted in better financial outcomes for that party. 3. Implement gradual protections. Don't try to protect everything at once. That draws attention. Instead, implement gradual changes that seem reasonable. Honey, my accountant suggested maximizing my retirement contributions because of taxes. My business lawyer recommended creating an LLC for the rental property for liability protection. I'm updating my estate planning as part of an annual financial review. All of these actions protect your assets, but have legitimate justifications that don't raise suspicion. 4. Obtain updated professional valuations. If you have a business, properties, or other significant assets, hire professional appraisers to determine actual market values. Do this now while there's no dispute. Why? Because in a divorce or legal proceeding, asset values are frequently disputed. If you have a professional valuation from a year ago that says your company is worth $500,000 and suddenly your spouse is arguing it's worth $2 million, you have documentation to contest. 5. Protect your digital data. Change passwords for important accounts using a password manager only you access. Set up two-factor authentication. Review access permissions on all your financial accounts. But do this in a way that appears to be part of good cybersecurity practices, not an attempt to hide something. Here's something I rarely see people discussing: the relationship between asset protection and emotional health. There's a fascinating study from the American Psychological Association that showed financial anxiety is the most debilitating type of anxiety, more than social anxiety, more than health anxiety. And the main source of financial anxiety isn't not having enough money. It's the fear of losing what you already have. People who have solid asset protection structures report anxiety levels 34% lower related to finances, even controlling for absolute wealth level. In other words, it's not how much you have that determines your peace of mind, it's how secure you feel about what you have. But here's the paradox: the process of creating asset protection initially increases anxiety because you're forced to confront uncomfortable possibilities. You're thinking about divorce, lawsuits, betrayal. You're having difficult conversations with your partner about prenups and ownership structures. It's like getting a complete medical checkup. While you're doing the tests, you're anxious about what might be discovered, but after you have the results and know where you stand, even if it's not perfect, you feel more in control. Let me tell you a few more real stories of people who protected themselves and why it mattered. Story number 2, Jennifer and the treacherous partner. Jennifer had a software company with 2 partners. The company was worth approximately $3 million. She had 40% ownership. The 2 partners had 30% each. One of the partners started making strange moves, creating contracts with vendors he controlled, directing clients to a parallel company he had, basically diverting revenue from the main company. Jennifer discovered this because she had implemented something called a buy-sell agreement when the company was created. This agreement had specific clauses about how to handle partner misconduct, including independent audit and forced buyout options. When she confronted the partner with evidence of the diversion, she had the legal option to force the purchase of his share at a predetermined value based on EBITDA from the last 3 years, before he started the scheme. She managed to buy his 30% for $720,000, based on the $2.4 million valuation from the last 3 years. Without the buy-sell agreement, she would have had to either accept his behavior or enter into an expensive legal dispute that could have destroyed the entire company. Because of a legal structure that cost $5,000 to create, she saved her company and eventually sold it for $5.8 million 3 years later. Story number 3, Robert and the nearly lost retirement. Robert, 64 years old, about to retire, had $2.1 million accumulated, the vast majority in a 401k account. He divorced after 28 years of marriage. Here's where he saved himself. Years before, when he had changed companies, he had done a rollover from his old 401k to an IRA, and he had taken care to do what's called a spousal waiver, a document where his then-wife waived any claim to that specific IRA account. Why did he do this? Because his financial advisor at the time had been extremely cautious and had recommended this document just to be safe. When the divorce happened, his ex-wife tried to argue that half of all his retirement assets should be hers, including the IRA. But because of that document signed years before, the IRA, which had grown to $800,000, remained completely protected. He ended up splitting the remaining 401k of $1.3 million, so he paid $650,000 in the divorce. Painful, but he kept the $800,000 IRA intact. Without that document, he would have lost an additional $400,000. A piece of paper that cost exactly $0 because it was done as part of a normal rollover saved $400,000. The return on investment was literally infinite. Now, let me show you the other side, stories of people who didn't protect themselves and paid the price. Costly mistake number 1, the businessman who mixed personal and professional. David had a construction company. The company was profitable, generating $5 million per year in revenue, net profit of about $800,000 annually. But David did something very common and extremely dangerous. He used the company account as his personal account. He paid his personal credit card with the company account, paid the house mortgage with company checks, bought a car for the company, but used it 90% personally. When he divorced, his ex-wife argued correctly that the separation between personal and business assets was a fiction, that in practice, everything was a single mass of assets. The judge agreed, and because David had pierced the corporate veil with his own behavior, the entire company was considered a divisible asset in the divorce. He ended up having to sell the company to pay the divorce settlement, a company he had built over 20 years, destroyed because he didn't maintain adequate separation between personal and business. What should he have done? Pay himself a formal salary from the company, keep accounts completely separate, document any transfer between company and individual. This costs nothing but discipline, but he didn't do it. Costly mistake number 2, the heiress who trusted the wrong husband. Lisa had inherited $1.8 million when her father passed. The money was deposited in a joint account with her husband because it's easier to manage everything together. 3 years later, the marriage ended. And here's the problem. In many states, inheritance is considered separate property, not divisible in divorce, but only if you kept the money separate. The moment she deposited it in a joint account, she commingled the inheritance with marital assets. The The result? The judge determined that the $1.8 million, which had now grown to $2.3 million with investments, was divisible marital property. She had to give $1.15 million to her ex-husband, money her father had worked a lifetime to accumulate, that should have stayed in the family, went to someone who was part of her life for only 6 years. What should she have done? Kept the inheritance in a separate account, only in her name. This would have been legally clear that it was separate property. It would have cost $0. She didn't do it for convenience, and it cost $1.15 million. From all these stories, the successful ones and the disastrous ones, some clear patterns emerge. Lesson number 1. Asset protection isn't about distrust, it's about prudence. The people who protected themselves well didn't do it because they didn't trust their partners. They did it because they understood that circumstances change and it's better to be prepared. Lesson number 2. Simple structures done correctly beat complex structures done poorly. Jennifer with her buy-sell agreement, Robert with his spousal waiver. These weren't elaborate structures. They were simple documents done correctly at the right time. Lesson number 3. The most expensive mistake is assuming you're safe. David and Lisa weren't stupid people. They were successful people, but they assumed bad situations wouldn't happen to them, and when they did, it was too late. Look, I know this video was long. I know I covered a lot of ground, and you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed right now. But here's the thing. Information without action is useless. So let me give you a 30-day action plan, something concrete you can start doing immediately. Days 1 to 7, audit and documentation. Day 1 to 2, create that asset audit spreadsheet I mentioned. List everything. Days 3 to 4, gather documents, deeds, titles, contracts, investment certificates, everything. Days 5 to 6, review beneficiaries of all your accounts. Life insurance, retirement accounts, everything. Are they up to date? Day 7, organize everything in a super organized folder, physical or digital. Days 8 to 14, professional consultations. Days 8 to 10, research and schedule consultations with 2 to 3 estate planning attorneys in your area. Many offer free first consultations. Days 11 to 13, have those consultations. Ask specific questions based on your situation. Don't hire anyone yet, just listen. Days 14, compare notes. Who did you trust? Who gave more substantive answers? Who has experience with situations similar to yours? Days 15 to 21, quick protections. Day 15, if you don't have a will, start the process. There are reliable online services if your estate is simple. Days 16 to 17, review all your insurance. Do you have an umbrella policy? Adequate coverage? Correct beneficiaries? Days 18 to 19, set up two-factor authentication on all financial accounts. Day 20, change passwords for critical accounts using a secure password manager. Day 21, if you have a business, review whether you're maintaining adequate separation between personal and business. Days 22 to 30, structure implementation. Days 22 to 25, based on the professional consultations, decide what level of protection you need. Hire the professional you chose. Days 26 to 28, start the process of creating the decided structures: trust, LLC, prenup, etc. This will take weeks or months to complete, but you're initiating. Day 29, have the conversation with your spouse/partner if asset protection involves them. Be honest, direct, but empathetic. Day 30, review everything you've done. Create a calendar reminder to review everything again in 6 months. Speaking of having the conversation, let me give you a script for this, because this is one of the hardest parts. Many people avoid implementing asset protection because they're afraid of this conversation. They're afraid of offending their partner, of creating distrust, of seeming like they're planning for the end of the relationship. But here's how you can frame this in a way that's honest but not offensive. Honey, there's something I want to talk to you about regarding our financial planning, and it might be a bit uncomfortable at first, but I need you to listen with an open mind. I've been thinking a lot about how we protect everything we've built, not because I don't trust you or think our relationship is going to end, but because I've learned that prudent people prepare for the unexpected. Just like we have home insurance, not because we plan to have a fire, but because we want to be protected if it happens, I think we should have legal structures that protect our assets from unforeseen situations. I've hired an estate planning attorney, and I'd like us to have a meeting together. It's not about me versus you. It's about us versus the world. It's about ensuring that everything we've worked so hard to build stays with us, no matter what happens. Would you be willing to have this meeting with me? Notice a few things about this script. It starts by acknowledging it might be uncomfortable. It's not accusatory or defensive. It uses an insurance analogy everyone understands. It frames it as us versus the world, not me versus you. It invites collaboration, doesn't impose. In my experience talking to hundreds of people who've had this conversation, most reasonable partners respond well when it's presented this way. And if your partner reacts with extreme anger or total refusal, well, that's valuable information in itself. Here's the truth that's going to make some of you uncomfortable. Money changes people. Not always, but frequently enough that you need to be prepared. I've seen 30-year marriages implode because of inheritance, seen siblings who were best friends become mortal enemies because of family business, seen elderly parents exploited by children they trusted completely. And the saddest thing? In most of these cases, the person who was harmed saw warning signs and ignored them because they didn't want to believe, because it seemed cynical to protect themselves, because our family isn't like that. But when you have millions of dollars at stake, even the best people can rationalize behaviors they never imagined being capable of. There's a concept in psychology called moral licensing. Basically, when people see themselves as moral and good, they give themselves permission for questionable behaviors, because deep down, I'm a good person, so this can't be that bad. Your spouse, who always saw themselves as honest, can rationalize trying to take more than their fair share in divorce because I sacrificed my career for the marriage, or I deserved it after everything I went through. Your business partner, who was always your best friend, can rationalize diverting money from the company because I work harder than him, or I had the original idea, so it's technically more mine. Your child, who was always dedicated, can rationalize manipulating you to change your will because my siblings don't take care of you like I do. Money reveals character, and sometimes it reveals character flaws that even the person themselves didn't know they had. Look, I know this wasn't exactly a pleasant video. It wasn't inspiring in the traditional sense. I didn't give you 10 investments that will make you rich, or the financial hack billionaires don't want you to know. I talked about divorces, betrayal, manipulation, and exploitation. Heavy stuff, uncomfortable stuff. But I do this because someone needs to speak up, because the silence around these topics costs people millions of dollars and years of suffering. Because asset protection should be as normal as having health insurance, but instead it's treated as something paranoid or shameful. I've seen too many people lose everything because nobody ever explained to them that protection was possible. And I decided that if I could help even one person avoid this, this video would be worth it. So if this video helped you, if it made you think, if it's going to make you take action, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And more importantly, share this with someone who needs to hear it, because you probably know someone who has built something significant but hasn't protected themselves. And look, I know some of you will watch this and think, this will never happen to me. And hey, I genuinely hope you're right. I hope you have 50 years of happy marriage, that your partners are loyal to the end, that your family is always harmonious. But hope is not a strategy. Trust is not a plan, and protection is not paranoia, it's prudence. Michael's story, that guy at the beginning of the video with the smart necklace, he's doing well today. He rebuilt. He's even in a new relationship. And guess what? He has a prenup now. Not because he doesn't trust his new partner, but because he learned that protection is self-love, not distrust. His businesses are growing, he recovered and surpassed the wealth he had. And he sleeps well at night knowing that nobody can take what he built without his permission. This can be your story too. You just need to take action. And remember, the best time to protect your assets is when you don't need to. The second best time is now. So stop, close this video, and do that asset audit. Call that attorney, have that difficult conversation. Your future self will thank you. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.